But there's one other
quickly. The first 3 questions, and then we'll go into diversity and inclusion.
Okay.
So, and if you want to mix it, that's fine.
Yeah.
So we have met many consultants because we want to know how businesses are transforming, why are they transforming, and what are the main triggers, right? So before we go into diversity and inclusion, how do you see businesses transforming, and what are the main triggers of this transformation in the last maybe 5 years?
The ones that I see, the 4 primary that we encounter the most with our business is globalization.
Mm-hmm.
So organizations who are now working in and finding themselves not only working with talent in other parts of the world versus where they grew up, or looking to establish a presence from a market standpoint in other parts of the world. So this notion of globalization we continue to see as a major driver of change. Speed of change is also a transformation. Many of our clients talk about what the speed of change being, a factor of X faster than it was in the early parts of their career. And I think we see that in virtually all aspects of a business, which is in part driven by the third kind of change lever, and that's technology. So when it comes to exploring how technology is not only helping us do our work differently, but providing different products and services, disrupting in new markets. Competitors are coming from a technology solution out of nowhere fast. Technology from an AI standpoint, how are we actually using and building AI to transform our workplace and thinking ahead about our workplace needs given AI transformation. And then the fourth and final one for us, and this is a big one for our work, and that's demographic changes. Not only shifts in what we would consider kind of the core dimensions of diversity, but immigration and migration patterns, where talent is being educated and education rates from across the globe. Racial, of course, demographic changes that are significant, especially here in the U.S. But then you also have demographic changes in countries like Japan, who it's a survival imperative that Japan figures out how to engage more women in its workforce and leadership positions. Otherwise, they won't have the capability to fulfill all of the needed roles and jobs.
It's a big problem there, right?
Gender is one of Prime Minister Abe's 3 national priorities.
Right.
But then with the demographic changes, I think the other thing that is a part of that, if I think about it from a demographic change, is talent demands. So our employees and workforce, and not just here in the U.S., globally, are wanting and demanding different things from their employer and the relationship that I have with my employer. So, it's not a secret. I'm not sharing anything new. The fact that, folks don't tend to stay in the same job that they start out of college or trade school and stay there till they retire. This notion of rotation, multiple career stops, what type of work environment I need to be successful in, remote working, all of those things come into play, and we kind of put all under the demographic change category as well. So those are the 4 main drivers that you're seeing driving a massive amount of organizational transformation.
Okay, so let's go into diversity and inclusion. First of all, what is the biggest challenge for you when you engage corporations and you start working with them to trickle down that effect of diversity and inclusion? What's the biggest challenge that you have?
There's a series of challenges. One of them is all of the earned baggage that the topic and very words themselves conjure up for many leaders in their mind when they hear it.
Can you explain a little bit?
Is it negative connotation?
Negative connotation, and past experiences with initiatives or efforts that didn't work, that had adverse or negative consequences. And so that initial perception is a challenge for some, not for all, but for some. So that's one.
Sometimes we can go off the record for 10 seconds. If you want to include certain things, it's very enriching for us because that prompts us to create different articles in the future without, and keeping you safe on the record. And, but if you want to tell us more things about that, please let us know. For example, that it has backfired. You said, that being inclusive and diverse, so.
Well, there are examples where organizations have launched a gender initiative or an initiative to hire more people of color into their organizations, or vets, and they bring them in, but there's been no investment in readying the culture to accept this talent that is markedly different. And then they find turnover rates that are double that of the white male counterparts. Or there's a perception that leads to white male, what we call very clearly white male backlash to the effort. So wait a minute, why are you talking about all of these initiatives and efforts that are helping everyone else? What about Me Too? And I don't mean that in the Me Too context of hashtag Me Too, but how do we all fit in? And how do we have a conversation that is about all of us when we talk about diversity and inclusion? So kind of challenge number one is the history and baggage. Challenge number two that we see a great deal of is moving from a compliance, check the box, what do I have to say and put on my website just to be, kind of level playing field, compliant, cost of doing business, if you will, to moving them to a more proactive, results-oriented, value proposition for the work. So that shift is a challenge. Many people will say, I want to do and I know what I need to do to keep up or to make sure that I'm able to be, and I don't mean compliant only from a legal perspective, compliant from a marketplace perspective to a more proactive stance. And the third is really a deeper education on the true value of diversity and inclusion. There's a lot of myths. This somewhat ties into the first point, but a lot of times business leaders in particular, they hear the word inclusion and they think, I've got to create a culture that is painfully nice. It's hold hands, sing kumbaya, everyone always gets along. It's a culture of nice. And for many leaders, appropriately so, that doesn't match with what they view as needed in their organizations. So there's a level setting that we often need to do that says inclusion in environments that are inclusive from our perspective. Constructive debate is elevated. When you have an inclusive culture, I am comfortable and safe to challenge status quo, challenge ideas, challenge the norm. And we have those fierce debates that are about the ideas, not the people. And when we have inclusive environments, performance management is actually elevated. I actually increase my ability to raise the performance bar and standards. And for a lot of leaders, there's this myth that it's something else, that it means we've got to ignore those things. So there's a lot of work that we have to do to reframe the conversation and put it in effective business terms.
Can you define diversity and define inclusion? Because I think some people think it's almost kind of like the same.
Run into that constantly, right?
So please, can you?
A lot of times these two words, and it's whether it's diversity and inclusion or diversity, equity and inclusion, or advocacy and inclusion. There's a whole host of acronyms. Belonging, the concept is out there now as well. So I'll kind of I'll lump all of them in together. But we simply define diversity as the who, all of the ways that we are the same and different based on characteristics we're born with, the experiences we've had, and choices we have made. A very broad, holistic definition of diversity. It's the who. Inclusion is the counterpart of that equation, and that's the how. How do we interact? what is the environment and culture in which that diversity is communicating, working together, achieving objectives, aligning around mission and vision. So inclusion is the how. What, or the who, rather, on one side, and the how on the other. And for us, when you get the right mix of the who, I've been conscious and deliberate about getting the right who I need for my business objectives in the maximum kind of optimal environment.
Yeah.
That's when the magic happens.
Right.
And it's not one without the other. One without the other leads to poor business performance. Diversity without inclusion leads to chaos.
Yeah.
Inclusion without diversity leads to stagnation and lower than optimal performance.
Mary, data, facts that you have that are interesting about diversity and inclusion that can shock us in a good way. Anything that you would like to tell us that from your research, from personal exposure to companies, facts, so that we can put some facts into this article as well.
So our organization is not a primary research house,
right,
just to be transparent, right? We rely on a lot of the work that comes out of Catalyst, as an example, from a gender perspective, and use and convey their data and findings. McKinsey and McKesson are two others that do a great deal of work in the overall space. So we tend to, we're not, I'm not going to give you inQUEST data or facts. That's not what we do. But we continue to believe that organizations outperform their competitors when they have a real and clear, proactive diversity and inclusion strategy, not just the check-the-box compliance-driven strategy. And that there are enough studies out there looking at organizational performance by core business metrics around top line and bottom line, revenues, margins, growth, that support a really strong correlation between effective D&I efforts and core organizational performance. We know already that, as an example of that, it's fairly a commonly held belief that when I increase engagement scores of my employee population, I increase the productivity of my workforce. I'm not aware of any dispute to that. What we do is really work to attach the notion of an inclusive environment to drive engagement. When I work in an environment where I feel valued, welcomed, respected, and heard, my engagement is increased significantly. Welcomed, valued, respected, and heard are four of the most important words in our work. And it's when I feel welcome, valued, respected, and heard when we agree, and more importantly, when we disagree. When you're promoting me into my next opportunity, and when you have to exit me from the organization because I'm not able to complete this task. You can exit me, you can fire me from my job, and still do that in a way that I still feel welcomed, valued, respected, and heard. And so for us, that's the mantra that we work on with our clients, and that drives increased engagement.
Pendulums. This is interesting because it's going to bring us to another topic, universities. We spoke to many presidents of universities like Loyola, Joanne Rooney. She's the president of Loyola University. And then I think Northeastern,
Gibson?
Yeah, many women. I can't remember all of them.
Actually, majority of presidents of universities that are not legacy universities. A lot of them are women, but they lack female leadership in those legacy universities on a national level.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. So the pendulum. So I told one of them, well, I think we're seeing a rise of more women in the in leadership positions. She said, I think there was a spike and then it's coming down again. So pendulums of how this is spiking or not in diversity and inclusion and women, for example, in leadership in the United States. Do you think that there was like a rise and then a drop, or is it plateauing, or where are we there in the United States?
I still don't think we've figured out the answer to that. I think there is a general belief that we need and desire strongly more women in leadership, decision-making, P&L leading roles in our organizations and in our boards.
You personally believe that?
I believe that there is a general openness and readiness to do that. I don't know that we have been successful, we broadly, at tackling the systemic reasons why we're not seeing greater and faster progress, given our desire for more women in all those positions.
So reasons have not been tackled. Sorry.
Actually, statistics show the reason why women don't progress as fast as men is they don't ask for it. They don't feel comfortable as opposed to men. Blatantly will say, I want that promotion. I don't know if I'm qualified for it, but I'll figure out when I get there. Women,
for the same reason the pay gap exists, right? For women are not asking for the increased salary negotiation and initial offer.
It's asking.
And so what are we doing to address that? If we can isolate that as a systemic cause, what are we doing to address that? What are we doing to change the way we're making positions available? And that we're really identifying and pulling talent up into the organization. We, in some cases, are starting to maybe tackle some of those, but we've not gotten there yet. Yeah. And the other piece, I'm going to go off perhaps topic and go back to something that is really prevalent, particularly what we see with our CEOs that we work with.
Yeah.
And I appreciated your comments earlier that maybe 10% get it. I actually believe that there's a really much higher percentage of CEOs and senior leaders who are committed and want to do the right thing, who fundamentally believe in the concepts of diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
They want to do it and they don't know how.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've been exploring, which has been of particular interest with the C-suite, is looking at who is in their most tightly held professional circle. Who do they surround themselves, not as their formal board of directors, but as their personal board of directors. So who are they having some of those most intimate, candid, frank conversations with? About their careers, about things that they're doing, problems that they're trying to solve, tough decisions that they're trying to make for their organization. Who's in those discussions? And that what we call go-to network for senior leaders. Typically 3 to 8 folks is all we have in that at most tightly held advisory circle. And by the way, these aren't formal structures. These are just the CEO's informal network.
Yeah.
The lack of diversity, even with a committed CEO, I want to do the right thing, I want to see more women involved. We continue to find that they don't have in that inner circle women as an example. They don't have LGBT folks. Or they feel like, wait a minute, we can hear a CEO say, millennial talent or Gen Z is the most important imperative we have for our organization going forward. Next question for us will be, great, who do you have in your personal network, CEO, that you are connecting with at this trusted, that you've built a trusted, intimate relationship with that's giving you advice and counsel about that perspective? And often the answer is none. So I think we also have to start changing. This is an example of doing D&I differently. Changing the way we help leaders think about how to make progress on this topic. I'm going to oversimplify. One of the things we often say to leaders is, they ask, what's the one thing I can do as a leader to start moving this forward? Our initial response often is go get some new friends. Put yourself where you're exposed to some of these differences that, instead of it being the other or a cognitive exercise, becomes a human experience for you. And so we're spending much more time on doing that work with leadership. So I thought that may play in here and be helpful.
We have a couple minutes more. Is there anything else you would like to highlight about the importance of diversity and inclusion? We talked about challenges. We talked about, why it's important, how companies and people can benefit from it. And
I will say that I think another thing that we need to be doing much more of with our leaders and people managers of our organizations is helping be very prescriptive and overt about our behavioral expectations. This work of diversity and inclusion has historically been a lot of awareness raising work. Let me explain to you how millennials are different from boomers. Let me explain to you the etiquette of language around disabilities. Let me explain to you the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity and why that may matter for the LGBTQ population. All that's good work, but that at awareness only doesn't help me navigate behavior change in the workplace. How do I run more inclusive meetings? That's not being taught when I'm getting my MBA. There's not a course on inclusive meetings that's prevalent. We're not taught what are the things that I need to think about and be aware of when I'm making project team selections for my organization. Who am I networking with and how do I do that? So we've got to get and do a better job helping leaders who want to do the right thing and don't know what that is. I think we have to do a better job providing them those answers.